Welcome to the Plant Spirit Podcast on connecting with plant consciousness and the healing wisdom of nature. This podcast is brought to you by the plants and my deep collaborative work with them as a plant spirit wisdom teacher, flower essence practitioner, financial coach, and co-creator of Plant Spirit Designs. To learn how to communicate directly with plant consciousness, you can check out the free workshop at www.learnplantlanguage.com. For nature-inspired financial coaching, visit www.financialabundancecoach.com. And for herbally inspired clothing that is an ode to the plants and the people who love them, check out www.plantspiritdesigns.com. I'm your host, Sara Artemisia, and I'm delighted to introduce our next guest to the show today. Nicholas Pearson is a flower essence practitioner and researcher whose love for plants has grown alongside his love for the mineral kingdom. Best known for his work with crystal healing and Reiki, Nicholas is an internationally acclaimed presenter and author of several books, including Crystal Basics, Stones of the Goddess, and Flower Essences from the Witch's Garden. So, Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
It is so wonderful to be sitting with you here now, and your depth and breadth of connection with both the flowers, the plants, and the mineral kingdom is so incredible to sit with and learn from. And in our conversation today, I'm really excited to get into the flower essences, plant spirit allies. And so for folks who are just tuning in for the first time, I'm curious if we could start with what really is a flower essence and how would you define what a flower essence is?
Sure. I like to start with the material side of things so we can just kind of get it out of the way. If you go to your local health food store, metaphysical shop, order online and get this bottle, dropper bottle that's labeled flower essence, the contents of that bottle are going to be mostly water and some preservative to keep things from getting slimy or fuzzy or moldy inside. So really, we're not dealing with something that is like a tincture or an essential oil or even a homeopathic remedy because it's not really tied to the material body of the plant. It's not any phytochemicals that are in there. Instead, with an essence, what we're doing is we are inviting the spirit of that plant to collaborate with us and imprint its consciousness, its life force, its soul patterning in that water in a way that's a lot like taking a photograph. So water will hold that consciousness, or as Dr. Batch, the founder of modern flower essence therapy, would describe, contains the healing virtues, the heaven-sent virtues of that plant, so we can work with it. So flower essences, a kind of working definition a lot of us use would be to describe them as dilute, energetic solutions that contain the life force or healing qualities of a plant spirit.
Love that. So succinct. So wonderful. And one of the things that I love so much about the essences is how we can work with them both from such a wide range of ways, from the very practical to the very etheric. And I'd be curious to hear how you work with flower essences in everyday life.
Yeah. So, I mean, my everyday life is kind of hinging toward the most practical side of things. I have a lot of earth sign energy in my chart, as we were chatting about earlier. And so if something's not imminently practical, why am I doing it? So as we record right now, within arm's reach are probably about 350 different essences. So I can just take them at any point while working. If I'm like, I'm a little scattered, maybe let's try some bunchberry essence, or I can't seem to put this worry to rest, so we're going to go for the white chestnut, or I just don't want to start my work today. It's time for hornbeam. So I will take them straight down the hatch, as we say, take them orally, add them to food or beverage. I will use them topically. And that's the kind of, we'll say, more therapeutic aspect of working with them. I partner with them. I collaborate. I co-create with the essences and the spirits, the consciousness, that soul spark imprinted in them in other ways too. They're wonderful to work with in meditation and dream work. They are phenomenal allies if we have a kind of ritual, magical, spiritual practice of any kind, because it's this direct dose of plant spirit energy and consciousness. And I find myself being really grateful for the subtle ways they work and not just always necessarily reaching for the dropper because I want to shift my own emotional state.
Yeah, I love that about the essences, how they provide such a bridge of connecting directly in with the plant spirit, and love what you were just sharing there about the collaborating with the flower essences, with the plant spirits as well through meditation and dream work. And I'm curious, shifting to that other end of the spectrum there, how can we work with flower essences in magic and ritual as well?
So, I mean, the name of the game is this kind of collaborative, relational approach. We can, in a magical and ritual side of things, we can view the tools we use as objects of concentrating, directing, condensing energy, force, magic, you name it, whatever the metaphor is that we like. And we can also view the kind of ingredients of spellcraft as just being materia magica. They're just substances we use because of their elemental or astrological affinities. And that is true, but it's also not the whole story. And when we zoom out to look at the whole story, there's so much more going on here. So oftentimes we find in any traditional spiritual herbal practice, whether that is making conjure bags or magical spell pouches and jars, or whether it is crafting special incense that you burn to attract love in your life, or doing some kind of plant spirit journey. In all of these instances, as traditionally rooted and centered, we find that the material body of the plant is the least important ingredient. The soul medicine, the magic is not in that bark or root or leaf or twig. It's in the consciousness of the plant. And therefore, that botanical substance we're using is an entryway, a starting point for our conversation with that plant spirit consciousness. So when it comes to working with flower essences in that setting, for me, it was purely accidental. It was a situation where I was doing something really formulaic and I didn't have all of the things the recipe required. So I was like, I have an essence of this plant and I just don't have any dried. I wonder if we're really working with the plant spirit in either way, could I just make a substitution? So I tried and I didn't fail. So then I tried again and some more and some more. And in theory, any application for a dried botanical or any other botanical ingredient in magic and ritual, we can hypothetically substitute the essence if what we're going for is that plant spirit relationship. Now, obviously, if you're making an incense and you want the aroma or the essential oil and you need that scent for something, you're not going to get that out of a flower essence. But adding a small amount of the essence to those applications can enhance that relational side of things and help us really center the work we do on the plant spirit and not on the list of ingredients. We're not just chefs in the kitchen following a recipe. We are creating something bigger than just the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I love that about the essences so much, and what you were just sharing there about how with the essences in particular, the physical part of the plant is the entryway into the conversation, and that how the magic is in the consciousness of the plant. I love how you were just sharing that, and I'm curious if you could share a bit more about how you experience plant spirits working with flower essences. I'm always curious to hear about this for people who work with flower essences, because it is such I found such an interesting, unique, energetic way to work with plants that is also incredibly grounded in the body. And so I'd love to just hear about your experience of that.
Yeah, so admittedly, I started consuming essences almost out of a sense of obligation. Really, it was more trust than anything. But a dear friend and mentor of mine, right before I went away to college, offered to make me a custom blend of essences. And watching this almost alchemical, clinical kind of preparation take place, I was almost disappointed to learn that no molecules from any of those plants ended up in that bottle. There's like not by any leaps or bounds could they be even hypothetically present. So I was very skeptical, but I did my due diligence. Everything is worth an experiment. I like to treat these kind of lived experiences as just collecting data, and that satisfies my scientific mind. So we need a robust enough data set to be a healthy skeptic and go, well, yeah, this didn't work. But I tell you what, the very first time I put 4 drops of that under my tongue, instantly I felt the relief. I felt the anxiety begin to lessen its grip. I started to feel a little less overwhelmed by the amount of change that was right ahead of me. So I continued, and wouldn't you know, flower essences work. So initially, it was just that kind of clinical relationship. There was no talk of plant spirits and anything that we talked about. No part of that was in our dialogue. But I started to notice that the essences I came back to time and time again, and at this point, we were only working with the 38 remedies created by Dr. Edward Batch or Edward Bach for most of us in the States. And the ones that would show up in my custom blends over and over and over again, it was as if they had something to say that was a little bit deeper. And I wish I could tell you that I followed that thread somewhere back then, but I didn't. And eventually, I moved away. I kind of let it go by the wayside. And I eventually came back to flower essences, not because I was buying them, but because I was led to make them almost completely accidentally. I had totally a different goal in mind for connecting to the plants in my region. And it just dawned on me after months of preparation and nothing kind of moving. Oh, I think I need to make an essence. And the act of making my very first essence was an accidental act of plant spirit communication. I thought I knew what plant I was going to start with. For whatever reason, the ethos at the time driving me involved only working with native plants. And I understand that's a complicated and nuanced and kind of artificial construct anyway. But that was my motivating force. And I go to cut that very first flower, and the feeling in the pit of my stomach just drops out. I get this strong, like visceral no in my body. But you're everywhere, you're abundant, you're in bloom. What's going on here? So I pull out my phone and I start the Googling process, and it turns out this Lantana camerata is an invasive species. I'm like, oh, this plant knew what my intentions were and said, no, I'm not the volunteer today. And I thought, okay, well, someone's got to be. So I just started looking for things in bloom, and it was one exotic species after another. I am totally ready to give up. And I just kind of scramble my way through a thicket of other things not in bloom. And I like round a bend, and here is this meadow full of sand blackberry, one of our many native blackberry species here in Central Florida. And it is just brimming with flowers. And I felt this decisive action. Okay, this is it. We're just going to do this. And I made my first successful essence. I actually keep a dropper full of that in my medicine cabinet so I can start the day with it if I feel like I need it. And I sat with the plant as the essence steeped, and I came back, and immediately my research brain wanted to go, okay, let's look up everything everyone's ever said on blackberry essence. And I thought, no, the plant spirit has to teach me. I have to have a lived experience. I'm going to collect data. So by the drop, I was exploring how it felt. I started to notice that it wasn't just heart opening, but it was like giving traction to my heart. It was, you didn't feel like you were fumbling around without a foothold anymore. Like things felt really more solid. And my decision making got a little bit crisper. And, so eventually I open up the Big Blue Book, the Flower Essence Repertory by Patricia Kaminsky and Richard Katz. And I look at their Blackberry Essence. And one of the first things that you will notice is that it's for indecisiveness, difficulty manifestation with manifestation. It's getting that kind of cerebral foothold, when your ideas don't land, it gives you the ability to have this grasping quality to give a concrete end result to the process. And I thought, wow, didn't Blackberry Spirit literally do that for me in the manifestation of my first flower essence? But also, I felt it rippling out in the rest of my life. So it is this kind of weird interplay between the esoteric woo woo, the plant is communicating something to me, but then it's also a very visceral, you feel the change. And sometimes it is so subtle and so almost like infinitesimally small at first that it's got to build. And you don't always notice these changes at first. I would not have told you on day 1 or 3 or 7 of taking the essence that I felt less indecisive, a quality that I was famous for, by the way. Instead, I would tell you that it felt like things were happening more easily. And maybe it was because I was making better choices. I wasn't vacillating. I was more aware of where my heart was and where my heart was headed. So I could make a more informed decision much more quickly. And I think that's part of the magic of that plant spirit relationship that I had.
Amazing. There is so much in what you just shared there. I loved hearing about the power of the direct experience. That is so powerful. And how, even though you were tempted to go right to the books, you thought, no, first I'm going to connect, gather the data first directly. And so I'd actually love to start there with the power of the direct experience, how you were sharing it's so visceral. And in your experience, how is communicating with plant spirits similar or different to communicating with humans?
Well, at the end of the day, everything comes through our personal filter. So if that filter is really clogged, we never get a clear message, whether it is a person, whether it is a flower, whether it is your pet, a rock, the sun, like it's all got to come through that filter. So the thing about people is rarely do they have the perspicacity to say to you, hey, I don't think your filter is very clear right now. So you're not getting this message. Maybe you know someone well enough and they know you well enough that they can just say, hey, I don't think you're getting this. And we'll reframe and recontextualize. But plant spirits, very simply, it's coming through or it's not. If our walls are up, if our defenses are up, if the message is important enough, they're going to find a way to get it there. Like you want to hit the brick wall to get the message, they will help you do that. And in other times, it's so tempting to render what they say to us in words, but you can't. How many of us who are plant people had this amazing time with this tree, this flower, this little bit of moss? And you tell someone that it was just like the best meditation you ever had. And they're like, okay, well, what happened? And you're like, you see, because they don't communicate like us. So it's really a process of checking the ego and learning to surrender and settling into a comfortable silence, a comfortable not knowing. And we can't do that with the average human being, especially one we don't know well. But the only way to do it with plants is to engage that way and to really just give up our preconceived notions of what we think communication looks like.
Do you have any tips for folks who maybe are interested in communicating with the plant and then go to sit down with the plant and then there's this sense of, oh wait, nothing's happening. Do you have any suggestions about dissolving that barrier?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I think the very first thing to do when we come to the place of oh nothing is happening is just notice how you feel. Start by taking inventory of your physical body. Like where were you before and where are you now? And it's actually a really good practice to take a little bit of self inventory before you start, generally speaking, spiritual practice, but especially when we do these kind of esoteric woo things that are very intangible. Definitely do it before then, because then you get your baseline measurement. That's your control sample, if we're going to speak in scientific terms again. So, just notice, where is the tension or discomfort in my body? Is it in the same place as always? where is the sense of openness in my body? And is it the same always? We tend to think about problems better than we think about the opposite. So we want to invite that and then expand that awareness outwards, not just my body, but what about my mind? What are some words I could use to describe how I feel? What thoughts are coming in? What might feel like just your mind rambling, like a bumblebee floating from flower to flower, passing from thought to thought, might be the way that you're interpreting the messages coming from the plant. You might not expect that recurring daydream about this great time you had in your childhood being at all part of this conversation, but it might be your mind's response to the energy presented to you. So we have to have a certain level of discernment to know this is my own stuff and this is my response to the plant spirit.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So helpful. And exactly what you were saying about taking that baseline inventory before starting. It's so helpful to have something to compare it to as the experience is evolving. So I just love that you shared that. One thing also that you were sharing earlier in your own journey with the initial experience of working with essences and then the continued one is you mentioned working with flower essences with the blend that the practitioner was creating was supporting some anxiety. And I was curious because that is so up in the collective right now. What flower essences have you found are so supportive for helping to ease anxiety, symptoms of anxiety?
One blessing of the age in which we live is we have no dearth of choices to us. There are just so many plant spirits, so many flower essences made in cooperation with them that address the kind of big umbrella of anxiety. So, the great thing about flower essence therapy as well is if we don't get it right, nothing bad happens. So it's not like other ways of working with plants where we really got to know our stuff. So you can do this process of experimentation and trial and error, but there are a few kind of classic ones that I think we could come to over and over again. We can work with something like white chestnut for the kind of worries or anxious thoughts that play on repeat in our heads constantly. If we're really concerned for the state of others. We live in a strange and rather dangerous world, and thoughts about our loved ones' safety and well being is pertinent to us. We might go to the red chestnut from the Batch Remedies. We could look at Mimulus for anxieties related to concrete things. Oh, well, I'm worried that I'm not going to pay this bill on time, or that I'm going to get stuck in traffic and be late for work, or whatever it is. If it's a concrete thing, and Aspen, on the other hand, is for the unknown fears. But if we go beyond the batch system, there are a couple of essences that I have found amazing for my own journey with anxiety. One of them is magnolia. The magnolia family is primordial, some of the earliest flowering plants in existence. And any transition the earth has experienced in the millions of years they've been here, they have survived, thrived, and carried on forward. So if they can do it, we can too, if we learn to be more like them, to learn to sink our roots in and stand our ground and reach toward our potential. So that's a good one for especially like anxieties related to our material well-being because they're built to last. Another one that I work with quite a lot for so many different reasons is foxglove. Oh man, I have this ongoing love affair with foxglove that started in earnest only just a couple years ago. I worked with it as an essence earlier than that, but I grew some foxgloves rather unsuccessfully. They don't love Florida. Then I finally just bought some and pretended they were annuals. They were already in bloom. They weren't going to live longer than the end of the season, so I didn't have to be too invested. I still get heartbroken at the end of every season anyway. But the magic of that flower, it is kind of a we know it traditionally as being a heart medicine, a dangerous one at that, not one to use on our own, but it is used medicinally. Things are made from its extracts in cardiac care today. So it is this kind of energetic tonic for the heart space. And there is a childlike wonderment that it evokes. At the same time, it promotes a state of better perspective. It lifts us upwards It's got this strong vertical axis with its inflorescence. It does the same for us. So we can kind of take a step back, take a deep breath, and look at things from the heart space and go, does this really matter in the grand scheme? Is this going to be my worry in 1 hour, 1 day, 1 month, 1 year? And it can be so good for that pause we need to respond meaningfully rather than react mindlessly.
Amazing. Again, so much in there. So you were just speaking about the experience of wonderment. Could you share a little bit more about that? How is wonderment so important? Why is it so important in the experience with plants?
So, in a rather unlikely source, I came to conversations about this notion of wonder as part of spiritual practice. I was listening to an interview with a chaos magician, like an old school chaos magician by the name of Phil Hine. I can't ever remember what show it was that he was on, but he was talking about awe and wonder in practice. And my big takeaway from this, a man who's a quote unquote serious occultist, the old school kind, and it's talking about this kind of like childlike joy that wells up in us when we engage in practice meaningfully. And I'm like, wow. So if there's no wonder, I'm doing it wrong. Full stop. Whatever it is, whether that's working with flower essences, whether that is my crystal therapy practice, my Reiki practice, making music, I'm an amateur musician. Whatever we're doing in life, if it is devoid of wonder, we're kind of missing the point. And it is the missing ingredient in meaningful personal growth. If we cannot take a step back and look at the world around us with awe, then we aren't seeing things. We aren't truly seeing things. Yes, the world is kind of a dumpster fire. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It really is. At the same time, because more than one thing can be true, there are sources of beauty and joy. We see movements of solidarity and healing and outreach and mutual support and all kinds of things that when you see the bigger motion of them rippling out through the world, through the cosmos, like, holy crap, this is an amazing phenomenon. And it's that looking better than I could put it in my own words. We can look at Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince. Only with the heart does one see clearly. Anything essential is invisible to the eyes. And that's for me the magic of Foxglove, is seeing through the heart and not trying to interpret with the head.
I just love that quote from The Little Prince too. Only with the heart does one see clearly. It's so true. And what you were just sharing about Foxglove as well has me thinking as well about how you work with such a range of different types of plant spirit allies. And one of the things that you talk about in your book, and actually before we even go there, could you just define what plant spirit means? Because I'm just recognizing we've been talking about plant spirits this whole time. For folks, who maybe want a little bit more of that grounded, what actually is a plant spirit? How would you define it?
Oh, yeah. So here's the $1 million question. You know this because you've seen the book. I spend a lot of words trying to tell you what a plant spirit is because the short version is the word, the expression, the phrase plant spirit means different things to different people. So my attempt at finding a common denominator is that there really isn't a singular plant spirit involved in any of this. There are layers of consciousness, which we think of as spirits. Spirits could be described as the prevailing tendency of something, the animating force within, the eternal or immortal soul. All of these things kind of contribute to our awareness of what a plant spirit is. So, in that sense, a plant spirit is that incarnational force, that underlying consciousness, as well as the collection of those prevailing tendencies or forces or virtues embodied in all aspects of the plant. And in a lot of traditional cultures, not all, but in a lot, we see that even the human soul is not singular. It is maybe made out of three or more parts in different parts of the world. And there are also other kind of soul forces that don't neatly fit into things. So we might view plant spirits in the plural as being a collection of an ecosystem of spiritual forces that conspire together to bring about the material and spiritual qualities of the plant. And that starts with our oversoul, the big overarching influence. It's the deva, the container of the blueprint of that kind of plant. So, there's one deva, one oversoul for every mugwort plant we're ever going to meet. We also have our, just kind of loosely speaking, we can call them our elementals and nature spirits. And these are the kind of forces that carry out the work drawn up by that blueprint. So if the oversoul is the architect, the nature spirits are the builders, and the elementals supply the raw materials. The best architect in the world doesn't get a building without those other forces contributing to the team. So no part of this is in, we'll say, a higher rank. It's not hierarchical in nature, although our minds might conceive of it that way. Beyond that, we also have, the individuated spirit. One being is incarnated here in this blade of grass or that flowering plant or this mighty tree. So all of these things together are the plant spirit and more. You look at an oak tree, especially a very, very old one, it's not one organism. It's rooted in the earth, it's touching the soil, it is part of the landscape, it is enmeshed in that mycorrhizal network. There are lichens growing on it, there might be mosses, there are birds nesting, there are microorganisms we can't see in every crevice in its bark. So plants are very communal, very relational. They are very networked, but our mind doesn't comprehend that as well as we might like. So we use these terms like plant spirit in the singular, which could mean the big overarching container. It could mean the kind of collection of forces that result in the experience I'm having with this oak tree, or we could also mean the individual soul that incarnated here in this plant when that acorn sprouted. So all of those things are plant spirits. And yet, I think all of those descriptions fall short because I'm trying to render the ineffable into words.
Absolutely. How do you translate that into words? But you just did a pretty fantastic job, so thank you for that. And yeah, I just love what you were sharing about how it really is an ecosystem forces and also that it's not hierarchical. This is so important in the plant world. And I have personally found that the plants operate and communicate in a very spherical way, which our human mind that is used to linear constructs, it takes a little while to wrap our consciousness around what that actually means. So you just shared that very well. And coming back to foxglove, though, I'm so curious to hear about your experience of working with the different kinds of plant spirit allies, which is something that you also talk about in your book.
Yeah. So some years ago, I would say it was probably 2017. I had the pleasure of sitting in a class taught by Christopher Penczak that was based on his book, The Plant Spirit Ally, Plant Spirit Familiar. It's one of the two. And he talked about this kind of threefold classification of plant spirits. And I was immediately intrigued. He talks about the balms, which are the healing herbs, the banes, they're dark and treacherous siblings, and then also the trees, who function like the wisdom keepers, the high priests and priestesses and priestesses of the plant world. And it kind of lays out the nature of these in his work. And then I ended up studying with him. He remains a big influence in my life and wrote the forward to the book as well. But I asked his permission, like, hey, I really love what you've done with, he calls the three kin, the banes, the balms, and the trees. And it really is the missing puzzle piece in some of the flower essence training I've had and some of the other plant work that I've done. Would it be okay to like take that and run with it? in the flower essence direction? He's like, yeah, go for it. So I sent him the sample and he gave me his blessing. But ultimately, nature is seldom black and white. We don't always get to put things in the nice, neat little boxes that we devise in our sterile clinical mental spaces. But generally, we have these tendencies. So the balms are essentially the kinds of plants that Dr. Batch was seeking, the ones that have these beneficent virtues that he described as heaven sent or God sent or imbued by the divine, and they have a kind of nourishing and uplifting action. These are going to be our classical plants that we use in herbalism, especially the ones that are, we're going to say, a little bit more at home friendly. So think of rosemary and sage, and also think of apple and rose, and so many things could be considered balms because they have this kind of nourishing quality. Their primary effect as essences when we work with the plant spirit in that medium is bolstering us, helping us when we feel depleted, neglected, burnt out, run down. It's really this kind of uplifting quality that they have through and through. Now, the baneful plants are poison plants. And, I'm going to put both of those terms in air quotes retroactively because poison makes the dose, as Paracelsus said. Everything is toxic in the wrong dose, including water. Our cells cease to function when too much water enters them. So when we think of the baneful plants, we often think of things like belladonna and other nightshades. We might think of datura and angel's trumpet, which are so prevalent here in this hemisphere. We might also look at things like my beloved foxglove, the yew tree, monkshood, all kinds of things. But there are some other pretty wonderful plants that, technically speaking, are quite poisonous. Think of tomato and potato. We eat the wrong bits of that, and I mean, you're in for a bad day. So the banes themselves, their primary action is transgressive. It is antinomian. It's if the balms build things up, the banes help break them down, and they can help us confront pain and trauma and other things that are swept under the rug. They can help us do that kind of Jungian shadow work, or even the pop version of shadow work that's out there today, by really facing what's there under the surface. They can be portal openers in a sense. I mean, any plant can be, but there is this connection to another reality. A lot of the baneful plants are also considered entheogenic or psychedelic in nature, and the quote unquote toxins they've got are psychoactive. So we could put plants like tobacco and cannabis, and I mean, if we interpret it the right way, maybe even we'd put the humble grape there, right? Because wine is derived from that. So again, we don't have these nice, neat black and white categories at all times, but they are major consciousness shifters. And then we end up with our tree spirits, who, by virtue of their own verticality, represent the connection between the kind of shamanic cosmology that we see in core shamanism, as well as in many indigenous cultures that has this kind of vertical axis. It might be the world tree, which of course we want to lean into that symbol in the plant world, but for some it is a mountain, it is a pole, it is the pole star. There's so many different ways that cosmogram is expressed around the world, and trees are connected to all those realms: the upper world, the underworld, the great between, which is where we are. So in some senses, I think trees are the most relatable. They tend to be the longest lived, they tend to dominate the landscape. I learned from mentor who taught me about rocks many, many years ago. Here in Florida, especially, where the southern live oak predominates among long-lived tree species, that in any landscape, if you want to find the energetic fulcrum, just look for the oak that is the axis of that landscape in the major or the minor. You'll find it. And if not, you'll find an analog to it in something else. And the trees are the transformers and containers of our reality. by serving as that kind of collective anchor point through which those other forces meet and are mediated. And they remind us, by virtue of our own vertical axis, that we have the same job to fulfill. We just don't always remember.
And I really feel that with the trees. Thank you for so eloquently expressing that and just articulating the different realms that these plant beings are working in. And I would be curious too to hear, because you have worked so deeply, there's so many different realms that you're connected both with the plants and the mineral kingdom as well. How would you say that the plant spirits and the mineral kingdom, all of nature really supports you in your life's work?
That's a big question, but I think the simplest answer that I can give is, at the end of the day, beyond the therapeutic relationship we've got, like, Rhodonite is here for this, and Foxglove shows up for that, or I take this essence when I need to focus. But beyond all of that, the rest of nature has mastered the art of knowing thyself. And humanity could. We have that potential, and we tend to not exercise it on a daily basis. We strive for moments of that clarity where we recognize that maybe the self isn't really here. Like, what even is the self? We can get super esoteric with that question, but we'll stay grounded. Nature knows itself. Nature knows that there is importance in everything, that nothing is wasted, nothing is ever lost. All things are transformed, transmuted, reborn in some way, that all parts collaborate to create the whole. And that if even one of those parts is disrupted, we lose nuance, if not lose the entirety of the bigger picture. And working with crystals, working with plants, working with flower essences, at the core level, is about reminding ourselves of who we are and what we're here to do.
Well, thank you so much. Incredible mic drop moment right there. So tell us, how can people find out more about you and your work?
Thank you for that. So, if anyone is interested, my books are available everywhere books are sold. There are currently 8 on shelves. That sounds right, with more on the way. And hopefully, you can find them in your local independent bookstore as well as online through all the normal retailers. If you want to connect with me personally, I'm pretty active on social media. You can find me at the Luminous Pearl on most things: Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, with the Instagram being the place I spend the most amount of time. You can also find my website at theluminouspearl.com. Check out my upcoming events and see what I've got in the works.
Well, thanks so much, Nicholas. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. Just so wonderful to connect and sit with you here. It's absolutely amazing. So thank you.
The pleasure is all mine. Thanks for having me.
And thanks so much for listening and joining us today on the Plant Spirit Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and please follow to subscribe, leave a review, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode.